excited to be here today. This is one of my favorite topics that I love to present activities on. And quite honestly, it's one of the topics that whenever I'm doing a needs assessment with a client, it's always one that pops up. They're like, we would love for our people to be better communicators. Like, wouldn't we all? So I have today, we're going to go through just a handful of things. And so for those of you that don't know me very well, Training Wheels, we're a portable team building company. And I started Training Wheels 19 years ago when I couldn't find a job. So I made one up. So I thought, you know, I'm pretty good at making up games. Maybe I'll make up a job and maybe it'll work for me. So I literally started Training Wheels when I couldn't find a job. So I started it 19 years ago in 1999. And a little bit of my background is that I have my bachelor's degree in psychology and my master's degree is in experiential education, which I got from Minnesota State University at Mankato. And I've done everything from adventure therapy and counseling with kids to working with corporate groups. I work in schools and universities, as well as I was a challenge course director for many years, also worked in the camping industry. So I have a really wide variety of background before I started Training Wheels. And now I service the industry, and all of those different organizations are now clients of mine. And I speak at a lot of different conferences annually, and AEE being one of them. And I think I've been to 20 or 21 AEEs, maybe even more than that, because I had been going to AEE prior to even starting Training Wheels. So a longtime member and fan of AEE, and have greatly benefited through the association over my course of my career. So, and I chose the name Training Wheels for my company because I love the metaphor of the training wheel. Is that you really only, just like when we were learning how to ride bikes when we were kids, we really only use training wheels for just a little while before it's up to us to take that training wheel off and own it. And, we might be a little bit wobbly the first couple times we try new things, but eventually we own it and we own the skill, and nobody else can do it for us. So really that's at the core of all the work that I do is that I'm only there for a really short period of time. Just like this webinar, we have 45 minutes to an hour together. And then it's up to you to take what you learn here today and apply it and own it and make it your own. So really it's one of my favorite metaphors, and hence why I chose it as my company name. So, and then here you'll see on the screen, we have all different kinds of departments, or spokes as I like to call them. And so today I'm going to present a couple of activities. Some of them are props that we carry in our online store, but these are really easy to make on your own as well. So I'll cover that and go over all of that as well. You don't have to buy anything from me in order to do the activities that I'm going to cover today. All right, so let's dive in. So today, just a little bit of just an overview of what we're going to do is first I'm going to go over some theory and research around communication and why it's so important that we are effective communicators. And then I have 3 activities that we're going to do: what goes where, Zoom, and lines of communication. All right, so let's start with that theory and research first. So my favorite quote on communication is this one: "The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place," by George Bernard Shaw. And I totally believe that to be true. Is how many times have you been sitting in a meeting with a team member or even with a spouse or a friend, and you have a discussion, and then, like, okay, we're going to do this, 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 and this, right? And then you leave the meeting or leave the conversation, and then you both go out in the world to do this, this, and this, and then you come back, you're like, were we in the same meeting? Because what happened out there is not what we talked about. So anyway, that's the greatest problem in communication, is that illusion that both people are on the same page, that it has actually taken place. And so sometimes miscommunication then looks like this. When you're dealing with clients, this is how the first picture is how the customer explained it. The second picture is how the project leader understood it. And the third picture there is then how the analyst actually designed it, right? So, so we can all look at the exact same thing and see it very differently based on our perspective and how we actually heard the information. All right, and then of course, I love all the cartoons that are out there about team building and things like that. So the Zits cartoon by Jerry Scott and Jim Borgman. So here's a great one. So this is what was said: "Jeremy, I've been thinking a lot about thinking about this a lot, and I'd like to run something by you that may really bring us closer together by deepening and improving our communication. So that's what was said. This is what was heard. Run. Right? So so anyway, kind of funny, kind of pokes fun at the miscommunications, but sometimes that's reality. Like, you hone in on one word and that is all we hear, and that's what we run with, and that's what our brain focuses on, and we don't hear it, the rest of the message at all. So here's some examples of different ways that we communicate with one another. One, by talking. I mean, that could be a face-to-face conversation, or anything like that. Email, very common one day-to-day now, is that a lot of people talk through email, and get things done through email. Texting, huge way that we communicate anymore. And now even social media through Snapchats and Facebook and Instagram and things like that. And then some people actually do still talk on the phone. I know that is not as common as what it once used to be. But so these are all different ways we can communicate. Now, here's the thing about communication, is that what communication actually consists of, it does consist of the words, the words that come out of our mouth, the words that we put into an email, the words that we type out in text, and things like that. But communication also consists of body language. It's a huge part of communication. Tone of voice, another huge percentage, and the emotion that comes behind it as well. In fact, there's some great research out there done by Albert Morabian on nonverbal communication, and in his research, he was able to prove that communication, the actual word spoken, actually only makes up 7% of communication. The other 93% comes up through these other things: body language, tone of voice, and emotions. And tone of voice and emotions kind of go hand in hand. But tone of voice is 38% of what communication consists of. And body language is 55%. Isn't that fascinating? I just think that it's so fascinating that really the words actually spoken are only 7% of the message. The rest of it all comes through these other things. Now, if you think about that, take the phrase, "What are you doing?" Right? So just a simple phrase, but based on the way I say that phrase, it has very different meaning, right? So it could be like, "Hey, what are you doing?" Like you see your friend you haven't seen in a long time, and you're like, "Hey, what are you doing?" Or if you hear me say it like this, "Hey, what are you doing?" That's a very different message, right? I said the exact same words, but my tone, my body language, and the emotion that went into those two things are very different. So it's one of the reasons why communication can be really, it can sometimes be really challenging for people, especially the main ways that we communicate anymore are through text and emails and things like that. And what are we lacking in that type of communication? Tone, body language, and emotion, right? Unless someone's typing in all caps, and then maybe we get it. Or maybe not. Like, I have that aunt that just types in all caps all the time, and I just wonder if her keyboard is stuck or she doesn't know how to unstick. I don't know. Anyway, so anyway, but we're missing 93% of the message when we are communicating through texting and emails and things like that. And it's the main way people communicate. So there's a reason why when the client calls and says, "We need to work on being better communicators," it's because usually their team has been communicating with 7% of the message. So, which leads us to, let's get into some activities that actually help us do this in the work that we do. Okay, I lied. We're going to do a little bit more research. Okay, so Rogers and Farson, this book here, Active Listening, they came up with 3 different recommended actions on how to be a better listener. I thought I would throw this in there just in case you wanted some of the research and things that are out there. You could go and find them on Amazon or Google and whatnot. So in their book, they recommend 3 different actions. One is listen for total meaning, both the content and also the underlying emotions. So this is where Morabian's theory and Rogers and Farson's theory come hand in hand. Respond to the feeling. Sometimes the real message is in the emotion rather than the surface content. So in such cases, you should respond to the emotional message, right? And then note all the cues. Not all communication is verbal, so watch for the nonverbal. Again, so Morabian and Rogers and Farson are hand in hand with that as well. So that's just a little bit, what I like about showing the research that comes behind effective communication as well, is that when you do stand in front of a client group, just, when you're doing games and activities with them, all of a sudden you've given credit and merit to what you're doing. And it's not just this funny game that we're going to do, but you've now added credibility to your program and the reason why we need to be doing communication exercises, because there's data out there that shows us that this is why we're bad at it. And this is why we need to do activities that really help us gain that perspective of why we're bad at it and what we can do differently in order to be better communicators. All right, so now we'll get into the activities. So the first activity is what I call what goes where. And this one just uses really simple props. My favorite props to use with this are some little dominoes and then also some pickup sticks. So you can see there in the picture, this is something you could super simply make on your own at the dollar store if you really wanted to. We do carry a set of these on training wheels, but this is one that you could make really easily on your own. And then for me, one time when I was traveling on an airplane to go do a program remotely, and the airline lost my luggage and I had no props to do the program, I totally, at any coffee shop, you can find straws and sugar packets. But you can do the exact same activity with that as well. So you can totally MacGyver a lot of these activities, and in the moment, you know, literally just look around your desk, and I bet you could probably find a bunch of stuff that you could use for the props of this activity. So basically what you do is you get people sitting back to back with one another. One person creates some sort of, I like to do three-dimensional designs because they're a little bit harder to describe and then also to build. So you have two people sitting back to back with one another. One person makes a design and the other person then tries to mirror and try to make the exact same design. So you can't look at what the other person's doing, you can only verbally describe. And so, so what I like about this is, one, if I'm the one that's building, then I really have to think about the perspective of the person that is sitting behind me. What do they need? What type of information do they need? Because a lot of times when we're communicating, we're really only thinking about ourselves and the needs that we have. I have a need to get this off my chest, or I have a need to say this to you. But in this activity, we now start to look at the perspective of the other person. What do they need? Is it my left or is it their left? And so it's a really great activity to really get them to think about that perspective change and how effective communication really, the receiver is such an important part of communicating effectively. It's not just me making sure I say all the right things, but it's also me making sure that I'm saying it in a way that the receiver will receive it well, right? So, so what you do is, you hand out all the parts to everybody and tell them I want one person to be the designer, the other person will be the builder, and then if they think they have it, then as the facilitator, say, call me over when you think you have an identical design. And then I will let you know then whether or not you either have it or whether you have a little work to do. And it's really interesting how completely opposite sometimes the design will be, and they think they absolutely have it perfect and they are so far off. So sometimes I'll give them a big hint, and I'll just say, oh, you are not even close. Or other times I'll say, ooh, you're close, I would just work on your dominoes or something like that, because you can see dominoes can either be laying flat like this or they could be up like this. And so it really depends on how well they've described it. And then the pickup sticks, again, it's just a matter of whether they put them under or on or beside or things like that. So so it's a really great one to that when they think they have it, they really don't. So always check their work before the reveal. And then often they think the message has been delivered clearly when really actually it hasn't. So then after you have one person that's just been the builder and then or the designer and the builder, then once they've done that and they've actually gotten their first design correctly, then switch the roles. Have the person that was the builder become the designer and have the person that was the designer be the builder. So that way then they get a chance to see what both roles are like, being both the sender and the receiver of the message. So, and I love the creativity that participants come up with in their designs as well. And I do challenge them. I said, don't just make a house, right? Like, a roof and 2 walls and the dominoes, the door and 2 windows. I'm like, oh, okay. All right. That is like a 0 level challenge, right? So unless you're working with kids, if you're working with kids, then of course that might be a really appropriate one for them. But if you're working with, 10, 11-year-olds and up, then I would challenge them to do some sort of more challenging design, and more of a 3-dimensional is way more challenging. And so it takes a little bit longer, but the debrief is a lot more rich as well.
Michelle, we have a question from Ryan. Just to clarify, if each person makes a design, or does one describe and the other builds? It sounds like both of those happen.
Yeah, exactly. So let's say if I had a group of 10 participants, I would partner them up. So so that way you had 5 small groups of 2 people. And then you would each give them the identical set of dominoes and pickup sticks. So if they each had 4 dominoes and 7 pickup sticks, make sure both partners have the exact same materials to work with. And then tell one of them, I would sit back to back with one another, just like we are here in this picture here. So sit back to back with one another. And then like here, Lemoyne is his name. Lemoyne, I would say, you know, if you be the designer first and design some sort of, make some sort of design with your dominoes and pickup sticks that you're then going to communicate to Mary. And then she has to try to replicate the exact same design that you have. So then they communicate, try to do that well with one another. If they think they have it, call me over, I'll check their work. If they've got it, give them some thumbs up and congratulations. If they don't have it, tell them what they need to work on a little bit. Like, don't totally say the top domino, work with that one. Like, you know, let them figure out what they need to work on. But, and then once they do get it, then have them flip-flop roles. So have Mary then become the designer of a different design. And then she would describe it to Lemoyne. So I hope hopefully that clarified it for you.
And one more question about the timing, just asking how long this might take for them.
I would give this one a good, depending on how many people you have, because some people go faster than others, but I would give it at least, with the activity and the debrief, I would give it at least 20 minutes. You know, if you think about it, if that's about, you know, 6 or 7 minutes per design, and then a good 8 minutes for your debrief. So, you know, because they're working in pairs and partners, it typically can go a little quicker than, you know, some of your other activities, but yeah, I would say a good 20 minutes for this one. All right, anything else on that one?
I think that's all the questions for now.
Okay, cool, thanks, Dan. All right, so now speaking of debriefing, when you do go to debrief any experiential activity, and actually this is a great point to bring up, one of my previous webinars I did was effective debriefing tools and techniques. And so if the debriefing is challenging for you, go check out that webinar that I did with AEE as well. But in general, when you go to debrief an activity, you know, the 3 questions that you ask a group afterwards start with, the first category is what? You know, the what, so what, now what? What happened? What just happened? And so for me, if I were debriefing this with an activity, or debriefing this activity with a group, the first questions I would start asking would be, how did you describe your design? What were some of the things that you thought of when you were describing it to your partner? Were you surprised when you didn't get it the first time and you were sure that you had it? What else surprised you? What did you learn? You know, things like that. All those questions would come under the what just happened. And then the so what is that, why is this important? Well, what do you think is the purpose? Why do you think I just had you sit back to back with one another and create these designs and try to have the other person figure out what it is that you were building? What do you think is the purpose? And then the now what is, how does this relate back to the real world? You know, is the way that you communicated with your partner here, how can you relate that to the way that you communicate with your coworkers back in the workplace? Or if you're doing this with a group of kids, how is it that when you're working on a project at school with a bunch of kids that you just got randomly assigned with, how are you going to communicate who's going to do what the project is, you know, and things like that. So so that's kind of the process that of what I would ask. And really some of the key debriefing points that you can pull from this activity around communication is often we think the message has been delivered clearly when really it hasn't. And most of the time, I would say the majority of the time, people aren't going to get the design correct the very first time. They think they have it, but they usually don't. And then they get really surprised when they don't have it, because they're like, oh my gosh, I so thought I described it so clearly. And so it's just a great reminder that that we don't always communicate as clearly as we think we do. And then the other important point is just to understand perspectives when communicating with other people. Is that just because we've said the words that have come out of our mouth, don't assume that the person has heard and understood everything that we've said, because again, the words themselves, 7% of the message. Even in what goes where, you're missing I mean, tone you can have in there, right? But body language you're missing because you're facing away from one another, right? So anyway, so we're even missing, even in this, we're challenging them on what they, on their communication styles. And then we also introduced the concept of shared mental models. Now that phrase is a phrase that I learned from Tom Leahy years ago in a workshop of his that I did. And it's really around, you know, creating that shared mental model. What I have in my brain, have I communicated it so clearly that the exact same mental model is in your brain. And I love that phrase, shared mental models, and I use it often in my work because it's one that really resonates with people. Are like, okay, I get that. Like, do we share that same mental model of what it is that we're about to go and tackle together? So that is the what goes where activity. It's one of my favorites, and again, super simple props that you can source probably right now from your kitchen or staff workroom, or even your own bag of tricks maybe. So, all right, the second activity we're going to talk about is Zoom. Now, Zoom is a picture book, and it was illustrated by this awesome visionary man whose name is Istvan Banye. And so basically this book, it's all pictures. There's no words, you know, written in, and there's no page numbers in the book. And so I found this book, cut all the pages out of the book, laminated them for longevity, because if you don't, then it's like a 2-time use activity once participants get their little grubby hands on stuff, right? And then scramble the pages all up, and then you give one page to each participant, and you tell them that whatever page you have is for your eyes only. You can't show your page to anybody. You can't tell anybody, so you can't show your page to anybody, and you can't look at anybody else's page. And then as a group, you have to get back in order from the beginning of the book to the end of the book without showing anybody your page. And there's 31 pages in the book. And then I suppose if you use the cover, you could do 32, but that's really not, it's no fun for the person that gets the cover. So sometimes what I'll do is I'll just have 2 people. If you have more than that, if you have a group of 35 and you've got 31 pages, then I'll sometimes team like 2 people up on one page, which is fine. So, so anyway, and this book is available on our website, but you can also get it off of Amazon and things like that. So, or probably your local library, or not library, because you don't want to cut up a library book, but your local like Barnes and Noble or brick and mortar store that indie bookstore of any kind as well might have it. So, so what I do then is, so just to give you an example, so the book itself, these are the first few pages of the book. So it's called Zoom because you literally start here at this crazy picture here that kind of looks like a starfish or something like that. And then every page that comes after that starts to zoom out from the original picture. So you can see here we have the comb of the rooster. Now we see the head of the rooster. Now we see the whole rooster with some 2 kids looking out a window. Now we see the full body of the kids, this door. We see the tiny rooster here. So this next picture, now we see these 2 little kids, but they're teeny tiny, and now we're starting to get more of the picture, right? So here we have, you know, farm animals and things like that. And now we see more buildings than the tiny farm animals. But now we can see that it's actually a toy, or we see these hands playing with the toy buildings. And then you pull out a little further and you see that's a little girl. And here, and you can see that it says toys. It's actually the cover of a toy magazine. And then there's some fingers here. And so then as it keeps pulling out, we keep zooming away from the original picture. And then it goes through 6 or 7 different storylines, if you will, before the very last storyline zooms out to the big giant Earth. And the Earth is like, you know, the size of a marble. And then the last page, it's all black except for a white dot. So the poor person that gets that page is like, I have a white dot. I have a white dot. Anybody else have a white dot? So anyway, but all the story goes in a very specific order. And so the group, since everybody has one page of the book, they've got to figure out how to get back in order from the beginning of the book to the end of the book. But they can't show anybody their page. So what I love about this is that as soon as you give all the directions, you know, and you tell them you can describe every minute detail you want on the page. You just can't look at anyone else's page or show them. And I kind of tell them, like this guy here is kind of folding the page in a little bit. I tell them kind of cup your page a little bit just so that it's not easy to look over, because, you know, we're all 10-year-olds at heart, and it's hard not to look when you see it right there in front of you. So, so anyway, so, you know, and then you know, all these little groups start clustering. So you can see this group here, they're kind of they've got more of a cruise ship theme. And so they start to cluster into these, first pairs up, and then they go into these, there's about 4 or 5 pages for each one of the storylines in the book. And there's, total overall, there's about 6 storylines then. And then you get to that eventually the little groups of 4 or 5 start to connect with the other little groups of 4 or 5. And eventually they get into one big circle, and there's about, I would say, a 90% success rate with this particular activity. There are a few pages that are critical links pages that are in the book, and whoever gets those pages, if they're not really visual people or not very detail-oriented people, and they miss those critical details on their page, then sometimes there's one group kind of standing off to the side going, I don't know how we connect. I have no idea. It doesn't make any sense to me, or anything. So anyway, which makes great fodder for you as the facilitator to use that then in your now what? Well, how does that relate back to the real world? There's times where, if you're working in a corporation and you've got your marketing department that is not talking to your production department, and there's been something that's changed and there's a critical piece of information that isn't shared there, then that can really interrupt the flow of, and the success of the entire team. So there's some great things like that when they do happen that you can use to your advantage as the facilitator.
Michelle, we have a couple more questions coming in about this one.
Okay.
From Ryan asking if you're describing it as a verbal game, could it also be a non-verbal game?
So yes, actually, let me advance to the next slide. So there's times where I have used this with kids. And so I usually have them start out with it being a verbal game. And then there's sometimes where they're just not seeing it. They're not getting it at all. And so then I'll sometimes say, okay, let's everyone put their pages down on the floor for like 15 seconds, or turn and reveal your page so that everybody now can get a visual of what it looks like. And then you can have them turn it back around and try to finish it verbally if you want to. But for some groups, it was, it's just too challenging of a landscape for them to really understand. So then I just have them, put it together on the floor and then try to figure out the puzzle pieces and as they go. And so yes, you absolutely can do it as a visual tool as well. So, and really that's for you as the facilitator, just to figure out what's going to work best for the age and stage of group that you're working with, whether they're more advanced team or whether they're, much younger audience, that the verbal is going to really challenge them.
Sure. So there's options.
Yep.
Genevieve is asking a little bit, can you explain more how you frame this activity to participants?
Yeah, so when I frame it with them, I'll, first, before I hand any of the pages out, I will tell the group, this next activity we're going to do is a communication activity. I'll even tell them that right off the bat. And say, what I have here are all pages from one book that I've cut this book up, laminated the pages, scrambled all up. And so in a minute, I'm going to hand each one of you one page of the book. Now, whatever page you get, that page is for your eyes only. You're not to show your page to anybody, and I don't want you to look at anybody else's page either. So what you're going to do then is, as a group, you need to get back in order from the beginning of the book to the end of the book, but you can't show anybody your page. Now you can describe every minute detail that you want on your page to the rest of the group or to a partner or whoever, however you decide to communicate with one another. But it's but in the end, the activity is over when you have gotten into into some sort of either circle or line that demonstrates the beginning of the book to the end of the book. And then I usually ask if they have any questions, but that's pretty much all the information that I give them. And sometimes they'll ask, are there page numbers? What's the name of the book? And I don't tell them those things ahead of time. But those are some of the questions that they sometimes will ask.
Great. And the last question I see, Mandy's asking how this would work for a younger audience. It sounds like the younger they are, the easier you can make it, up to just everybody look at the pictures, everybody say whatever you want, and just try to find the order.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and so let's say, 31, that's kind of a magic number, right? Like how many groups actually are a group of 31? So if I have a smaller audience than that, then sometimes what I'll do is I'll just take a cross section. So I'll leave out like the first 10 pages and I'll leave off, the last 10 pages, and then I'll work with that'd be a group of 11. I'll take a cross section of the center. So you really want to try to have at least 2 or 3 storylines in with what you do, or that's one way you can do it. Or if you want, One way that I've done it with groups is I've given out, one or two pages from each one of the storylines, and then other pages I'll put face up on the floor, or face down on the floor. And then I'll tell them, as a group, you can turn each one of these pages over one time for 15 seconds each. And then, so that way, then you're giving them a little bit more of a picture of what might be there. And then when somebody is like, oh, I'm right next to that page, then they might, when it turns back over, they might like drag it with their foot or something like that. And so that way, like, remember this picture here was the one, and it was like this, and and so, but they have to use their team memory in order to remember what was on that page, because I usually, unless it's a really young audience, I usually don't let them turn the page back over and look at it again. So this is one of those that you can get so creative with when it comes to how you actually do it. I did this activity last week actually, and I had a group of 20, and and so I took cross section of the of the center of the book, and at the end, at the end when they feel that they have it, and and then I kind of walk around and kind of look and see, and sometimes I'll say, well, you're not quite there yet, or I'll say, okay, if you think you have it, then let's see how you did, and just if they feel like they're going to deliver the right answer, then sometimes even if they're not in the correct order, I still will sometimes just let them see where how close they got. So then I'll have them turn the pages and reveal where they are, and then I walk around the center of the circle and I say, okay, so what we have here is we start with that we have the comb of the chicken, and then we have the kids, and then the farm, and then the toy magazine, and then it was being held by this kid on the cruise ship, and and how it all progresses. So I kind of walk through the story as I'm helping them see that, yes, you were in the correct order, or, oh, and here's that one little detail that we missed, how this one link here didn't quite make it, and this is why we couldn't connect this one group to this other group. And so anyway, so and once you know the story, you can't do it again, right? Like, this is a one time with a group kind of activity, because once they know the right answer, then they know the right answer. They know how the story goes. So then when I go to debrief this activity, of course, I start with, well, what just happened, right? So I gave you all the pages of the book. What happened? What did you do? How did the group communicate with one another? So I let them walk me through them. Like, oh, we first like partnered up, and then we found little groups, and then we got into their bigger group, and then we were blah, blah, blah. Everyone went around the page, around the circle, and tried to figure out what we had. And so like, okay, well, once you got there and you felt like you really had it, like, what do you think is the purpose? What do you think is the purpose of this activity, and you trying to get in this order, and and things like that, and then how does this relate back to the real world? How does the way that you worked in your really small little groups, and then you connected with these other groups, how does that relate back to the real world? And so a lot of times I'll even ask the question, how many of you felt like in your little storyline of 4 or 5 people, you knew it really well? Like, you knew you were in the right order, and like nobody could tell you different. And most people are like, yeah, we totally knew we had it. I didn't really know what those other groups were doing, if they had it, but I knew our group had it. I'm like, okay, great. And so I'm like, but how is this like organizations back in the real world? How is it that, like on you and your immediate team, do you just, the working styles of the people you work with, what everyone's working on, that people are hitting deadlines and doing what they need to do. But do we really know what people are doing, especially if you're in product development or whatever, but do you really know what people are doing in marketing or sales or finance or any of the other departments? And one thing that I love about the Zoom book is the last picture being the earth. I love it. It just sets you up for such a great metaphor for what's the big picture. And, in the grand scheme of things, we all need to know what we, are all, working on, and we need to make sure that everyone knows what they're doing. But that goes for the entire organization. We have to trust that people over in the other departments know it and own it and are doing their jobs to the best of their ability as well, because in the end, the big picture is that we're all here servicing a greater need for our clients or whatever it is. So, some of my key debriefing points in at the end is that this is a great way to connect silos and other departments to teams to see the big picture. Details really do matter. There's a couple key pages in this book, and that if people miss the really, the details on a couple of the pages, it's a lot harder for them to succeed. And then also, this is one that will surface behavior preferences and the way that you communicate so beautifully. There are some people that are the talkers and the organizers. They're like, okay, and they're the really loud ones, right? And then you have those others that are really quiet and they're a little bit more process oriented, and they're not going to be the ones that jump out there and you hear their voice first. And so people can get really frustrated in this activity, like, oh my God, will that person just be quiet? Or, you know, it's like, oh, like I, you know, or they don't have enough time. And so whatever way that your preferred communication style is, it will pop up in this activity. And this activity, I usually allot at least a half an hour, if not 40 minutes for this activity, because it takes, especially if you have a full group of 30, 31 people, it takes a long time for them to get in order. So if you think about it, if you've been working on the same task for 30 minutes and like you've got that one page, like I have a white dot, you know, like 30 minutes just describe a white dot, people are like, oh my God, I'm so over this. And what I love about that then is you can bring it back to the now what. How does this relate back to the real world? How many times have you been sitting in a meeting and you're like, oh my gosh, that guy is driving me crazy, or that kid or that whatever. And so your behavior preferences will pop out like crazy in this activity. Are there any more questions on this one, Dan? I think I saw something else pop up.
Genevieve was asking about giving several storylines to the group or just one.
Let's see here. Well, so the book itself, it's all one story, but there are these little storylines. So there's like the farm that you saw me describe. But then it's a toy magazine. So then you have a couple pages of the toy magazine, and then there's a cruise ship. So all the cruise ship people find one another. And then there's this city scene, and it connects to the cruise ship. And so all of those people find one another. And then there's a desert scene, and the desert people get together. And then there's an island scene, and all the island people get together. And then there's an airplane scene, all the airplane people get together. So it's one story with multiple little storylines inside of it that all connect to one another. So if you have a smaller group section, let's say you have 15 people, I'm going to try to choose 3 of the consecutive storylines that match one another, so that all the pages will connect. It's one after the other. But to do a cross section of 3, because otherwise if you just do, you know, only 2, it's not quite as rich, because you really do, the 3 just gives you that many more options for that critical link to be challenging for them to connect the small sub storylines to the bigger storyline. I hope I communicated that clearly. Here I am doing a communication activity workshop, and I'm trying to communicate the activity direction. So I hope that resonated. So anything else, Dan, on that one?
No, that's all the questions for now.
Okay, cool. All right, so my last activity here, yeah, we're at 12:40. So my last activity that I want to describe, this one here is one of those activities you really need to plan about 45 minutes and no less for this activity, especially if you have a larger group. If you have a smaller group, you might be able to shave a little bit of time off of that, but this one here, it's great. And the maximum that I would do on this, and I have stretched this before, and I've kind of crashed and burned on it. So I would not do more than 30 people at one time, and that's 10 people per small group. So you basically have the first line, and when I say the first line, that's going to be this line that's up here against the windows here. That first line is the no talking. So this one here is challenging to set up, especially if you are facilitating by yourself, because each one of these 3 groups have different rules and limitations for what they can and can't do. Overall, they're all trying to achieve the same goal, but they all have different roles and responsibilities and limitations on what they can do in the activity. So, so the first line back here, and actually I usually give the directions to the first line last, just because they're the ones that you don't want them to strategize at all during this activity, after you give them their directions. And then, so first I'll tell you the limitations for each group, and then I'll go back and I'll give you the order in which I give the directions, so that way you fully understand. The second line here, the people that are seated here, these people, they have all of their resources to where they have their sight, they have their voice. The only thing that I ask of them is that they cannot look behind them at any point in time throughout the activity. And they can't move either, even if somebody asks them to. And so when you say it like that, they all of a sudden will get super suspicious that people are totally going to ask them to do things that they're not supposed to do. And they do, which is why I say that, because you don't want them to move from that line. And then the third line, these people that are sitting back here, they all have their eyes closed. So they, at no point, they have to have their eyes closed for the duration of the activity. Okay, so here's how I set this up. Now, so usually I have like the first line here, I will actually, because we have these great doors right here that went out into a courtyard, I sent the first line out into the courtyard so that I could get the other two groups set up without them hearing what I was doing. Then the second line here, now I usually don't have people seated for this activity, but we had a couple people with mobility challenges in this particular group. So we just made it to where everybody was seated, so that way it was inclusive for them. But I would recommend having these people stand. It's actually, in my opinion, better. And I'll show you what happened with this group because they were sitting also. And so this group here, I usually also have them standing, but they were tired and they wanted to sit. So I'm like, all right, sit down, I don't care. So anyway, so I start with this group back here, the people with that are going to have their eyes closed. I have them huddle in real close to me, and I just tell the other groups, I'll be with you in just a moment and let you know what the rules to the games are. So just hang tight, talk amongst yourselves, and I'll be there in a moment. So I get back here to this group here, and I just tell them, from this point on, I'm going to ask you, I need a commitment from you that you're going to keep your eyes closed for the duration of the activity. And all the rest of the information that you're going to need to be successful in the activity will be given to you by the rest of the team. And everybody is on one big team. However, we all have different roles and responsibilities in the activity. So I said, I need a commitment from you that you'll keep your eyes closed for the duration of the activity. And at this point, you can't really have them move to a different group because you've already told them what the limitations of this group are. So if you were to move them to another group, then they would already know kind of the inside scoop of what's happening. So sometimes when you're having people self-select into a group, say, I need people that are okay with bending down or sitting or different on the floor and different things like that to join me at the back of the room. You know, if that's not something physically that you can do, then please choose a different group to be in, and it doesn't matter which one. So that's usually how I phrase that when I'm having them divide into the 3 small subgroups. So then after you give the directions to them, tell them, okay, from this point on, I need you to close your eyes. Also, I'm going to be your safety monitor, so I'm going to be you're going to hear me walking around back here. Because it's, this was an all-female group, but if you do, just in general, I always tell people, anytime you have your eyes closed, I want you to put your bumpers up, and that just, makes your hands out in front of you like this. So that way then you can feel if something is in front of you. It also protects you, especially if you have a mixed male-female group. It protects anyone from accidental uncomfortableness. Or groping. And so if everybody has their hands up, then you'll just, they're there to buffer. So anyway, then tell them you're going to hear me, and if I see you starting to walk towards a wall or towards another person or something like that, and I feel like you might step on someone or something, then you'll hear me. I'll come around and I'll just tap you on the shoulder and say, hey, it's Michelle. You're getting really close to the wall or the door or something like that. So you might want to turn around and go another way or something like that. So, and that's an important part to say is 1, to make sure that you keep them safe. And 2, you need to do some things back here after they have their eyes closed. So it's important that they hear you say, hey, it's Michelle. I'm back. I'm going to be back here making some noise and moving around. So I'll get to that in just a moment. Then after they have their eyes closed, that's actually when this group decided to sit down. It's like, well, if I have my eyes closed, I'm just going to sit down. I'm like, all right, fine, sit down. So so they all just sat down and waited, which I'll get to that in a minute, which actually made the activity really slow to start because they were just sitting and didn't really want to do anything. So, but I'll get to that in a moment. All right, then you go to this next group, the group line number 2, they cannot look behind them. So this group, I have them huddle in so that the other group that's already in the room, they can't hear you. So you have to be really kind of quiet and careful with your direction so that the other groups can't hear you. And just tell them from this moment forward, in a moment, I'm going to have you all sit here or stand here on this line and make a really designated line. And say, for the duration of this activity, you cannot look behind you at any point in time. And I need a commitment from you that you won't look behind you. And I usually say, now nothing's going to happen to you. No one's going to throw anything at you, and, you know, or anything like that. But it's just really important that you don't look behind you at any point in time in the game. May I have your commitment in doing that? And I always get a verbal commitment from people, so that way you know that they were on board. And then I say, and one more thing, you know, and then I also tell them, we're all on one big team. We're all trying to accomplish the same goal, but we all have different roles and responsibilities in the activity. And say, and also you cannot move from this line, even if somebody asks you to. And so that's usually where people like will throw up the like, what? And they start getting really suspicious of what other people are going to ask them to do. And so, and then you just let them sit and marinate in that while you go and then talk to the other group. So the other group number one, that was out in the foyer or the lobby, or the courtyard, you go out there and then say, okay, you guys, from this moment on, you do not have the resource of your voice. You cannot ask me questions. You cannot clarify any of the rules. You cannot collaborate with one another. And so I'm going to be very specific with the rules, so that way you know exactly what is expected of you when you go into the room. But you cannot ask me questions. And someone will always ask a question. And so, like, well, what about, I'm like, and you just have to cut them off and say, I'm sorry, you don't have the resource of your voice and you can't ask me questions. But every single time somebody will try to talk to you and try to ask a question and try to collaborate, you're like, I'm sorry, but you've lost the resource of your voice. You may not talk. So tell them, here's what's going to happen. In a minute, I'm going to go, you guys are all going to come in the room and you're going to stand behind, they're actually standing behind a rope. Just to give them a nice visual on what their boundary is. And so, and then I just tell them, you're going to stand right behind that rope facing the rest of the group. And then in a minute, I'm going to go around and I'm going to drop. Now, do you see on the floor here, there's all these rubber chickens and stuffed animals and different things lying here on the floor. Well, the blindfolded people don't know they're there because I don't put those out until I've given all the directions to all three of the groups. So once this group is in place, they are not talking and they're kind of like gaining the scope of what's happening. I now come to the back, which is why you tell the group, if you hear me walking around back here, it's just for your safety and I'm going to keep, you know, whatever. But really you need to tell them that because you're going to go around and you're going to very quietly just place, don't throw, because as soon as you lose your eyes, your ears, they pick up every little minute sound. So just very carefully place about 10 to 15 items on the ground, all around the blindfolded people or the people with their eyes closed. And so, of course, they don't know they're there because they have their eyes closed, right? And so then the line one, they don't have their voice, but you tell them, you have to communicate to the rest of the team that you need to pick up all the items that I'm going to put on the ground and put them back into a bag. So I also place, you know, all of my stuff comes in stuff sacks. So I always place the stuff sack. I hold it up and I show the group, here's the stuff sack, here's the bag. I don't say it out loud, but I just like hold it up and then I point to it and then I put it on the ground. So that way they know exactly what bag it is that I want them to have the blindfolded people pick up all of the stuffed animals and things that I put on the floor and put them back into the bag. So the activity is over when all of the items have been picked up and put back into the bag by the rest of your team. So that is the directions for the activity. And it is, it's a long activity to describe and set up. It's also a long activity for them to actually complete and do. So, so anyway, so like I said, give yourself 45 minutes to even an hour with the debrief, because the debrief on this one is so good and it can last a really long time. So, all right, so here's how it works. So I gave this group this direction. So these people here are all miming all the directions, and so they can't talk, but they're like you can even see they're pointing at they're pointing at the stuff on the ground. Well, the people that they're pointing to that have their eyes open cannot see what it is that they're pointing at because they can't look behind them, right? And so so this whole group, it's quite comical to watch them try to figure out, because again, if you remember, they couldn't even talk to one another. So they're really kind of going at this all on their own. And they might see a good example by somebody like trying to mime or trying to like having some sort of success. Well, this group here, for whatever reason, whatever they heard in my directions, they heard when I said, um, when I said, don't, you can't move from that line, even if somebody tells you to. For whatever reason, what they heard me say was, you can't do anything that anyone tells you to do, which really was challenging then, because of course you have to have this second line in order for the activity to work. And so it was painful at first for this poor first group, because they're like miming their little minds out trying to get this second group. And of course this group just sitting and watching and kind of giggling. I'm like, okay, well, I don't know what you're doing, but it's kind of funny, right? And then of course this group at the back, you know, they were bored out of their minds. Now this is when they finally, what I had ended up having to do was, that's me there, eventually I had to come and basically stand in front of this group and say, you can talk and you can do what they've asked you to do. You just can't move or look behind you. And then a couple of them were like, oh, right. So anyway, eventually the activity got moving. So, but again, thinking about effective communication, what I said and what they heard didn't really resonate. I told them, you know, the correct directions, but it didn't resonate with them, and they heard something different, and their behaviors matched it, right? So anyway, eventually they started, and they were able to start, you know, telling the people to, you know, crawl around on the ground, pick up the things, and put them back into the bag, right? Well, eventually, you know, sometimes what happens is, you know, one of these people here in the first line will pick one person directly across from them to kind of create a line of communication, and then they'll figure out one person that is, you know, in the back group, and they'll target on a one person. If they can figure out their names, if they can figure that out, then the activity goes a lot smoother, at least for those three, because they feel like they're making forward progress, and it's not just the blind leading the blind, literally and figuratively. So but this woman here in this black hat here, she was kind of fascinating to me, because she could hear that other people had, and look, that person totally peeked right there. Her eyes are totally open. But the rest of the people actually had someone that was communicating directly to them. And this woman here in the black hat, she didn't have anybody that kind of picked up or honed in on her. And for her, look at this body language that started happening. She completely shut down. She, at first, look, you could see she was totally active, engaged, picking up items, but as soon as she couldn't hear her voice, and, you know, as soon as nobody was really telling her what to do or communicating with her directly on how she was doing or anything like that, she completely shut down, and, I mean, crossed body arms, quit functioning altogether for the duration of the activity. She sat like this for probably another 10, 15 minutes. So it's really fascinating to watch. And then everybody else, you know, they crawled around. They ended up finding a random box that was at the back of the room, as well as the bag that I told them to put the stuff in. And so anyway, it was pretty chaotic, a lot of fun, you know, and in the end, they did get everything picked up. Now, the debrief around this for this particular group was fantastic. It really was. So I'll come back to this in a minute. This is a video. I'll come back to that in just a second, of a different group that was doing it. But, you know, so when I go to debrief this activity, you know, and I start with the what just happened. Usually, you know, as soon as they pick up that last item, I give them a big round of applause. I'm like, okay, you may open your eyes, you may turn around, and you may have your voice back, and let them, you know, kind of, there'll be a big eruption, like, oh my gosh, what just happened? And so I get them into a big circle then to debrief it. And so the what happened, or what just happened, I sometimes will start with that. It's like, oh my gosh, what just happened? It's like, well, let me explain what the limitations were for each group. So then I go through and I describe what each group could and couldn't do, because the people that had their eyes closed, they have no idea what just happened, because their eyes were closed the whole time, and they're really in the dark about what was going on. So then I say, okay, so the people back here at the back of the room, clearly you know that they had their eyes closed, and here's the directions they were given. I asked them for a commitment to close their eyes for the duration of the activity, and they were not to open them at all, and they had to keep them closed for the entire activity, and the rest of the information that they were going to need to be successful would be given to them by the rest of the team. And that's it. That's all the information they were given. And that's before I scattered all the things on the ground, so they didn't even know they were there. And then the second line, they were asked for commitment to not look behind them at any point in time in the activity and not to move, even if people asked them to. And the rest of the information they would need to be successful would be given to them by the rest of the team. And that was it. And then the front, the first line, they were told from this moment forward, you don't have your voice, you can't collaborate, you can't ask the questions, and you need to communicate to the rest of the group to pick up all of these items off the floor and put them back into a bag, but they couldn't use their voice. So those were the limitations that everybody was given. And then I usually start with the blindfolded group because they're the ones that just had a really crazy time, right? Like on the ground and like had their eyes closed and whatnot. And so I said, people in group number 3, what was that experience like for you? And then you'll have lots of people like, oh my gosh, it was so confusing. And I didn't know who was talking to me. I didn't know if I was doing it right, if I was doing it wrong, and, all of these different things. And, and then I moved to the second line. What was that like for you? It was like, oh, it was so overwhelming. I was trying to decipher. I was trying to communicate, but I couldn't see what they were doing. And so it was so hard to know. Like, I didn't know if I was giving correct directions. It was on my left or was it their left, or, did they get it? Did they not get it? I couldn't tell if there was, how much progress we had made. I was, I felt really conflicted between trying to decipher as well as trying to deliver. And they feel really torn by the group, or by both of the groups. And then the front line, I was like, oh, I was so frustrated. I could see it, but I couldn't communicate it. And I had this vision for how I could do it, but yet nobody could, hear my vision and all of these things. So again, everything you just heard me say, those are things that they will say. And it is facilitator gold when you get to the, why is this important? And how does this relate to the real world? Why is this important? Why do you think I would do an activity, make you do something like this that is so, that challenged your communication so heavily in order to accomplish a task? Why do you think I asked you to do that? Right? And then I will lean in and I, really get them to dig into that. I'm like, so what's the point? How does this relate back to the real world? It's like, if you're working with a corporation, middle management, oh my gosh, they feel, you've got your upper management, your middle management, and your frontline workers, right? And that's exactly what it feels like. Frontline workers, they're like, oh my gosh, do the people at the top have any idea what we even do? No, they don't. They're so far removed from it. And, and sometimes we feel that middle person is just, like, what are they, what direction are they giving me? I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm not getting good direction from my leader, from my manager or whatever. And then the people at the top, they're like, oh, I could see what needed to be done, but I just couldn't communicate it fast enough, or, things would change as soon as I would, feel like we had a system in place, and then it would change, so really amazing things, that you can tap into for how does this relate back to the real world. So, key debriefing points for part 3 there, the now what, is to recognize the challenges of communicating through others. When you're trying to communicate visions and cascade goals throughout an organization, it's challenging when you have to send the more people that the information has to go through, the more it might get lost in communication. And then also understanding the challenges and the limitations of different communication styles. People need information differently. Not very many people are really good at auditory learning. And so when you take away someone's sight and they only have auditory, think about it, that's when you call somebody on the phone, that's the type of communication we have. And yet, again, we miss body language in part of that, and that was 55% of communication. We can get tone, we can get 38 plus 7%, but we're missing, a huge percentage of it, even when you're talking on the phone. And then just recognize the different challenges at all levels of an organization. Everybody is challenged, no matter what it is. If you're a facilitator, even if you're self-employed, you are sometimes at the top, the middle, and the bottom, depending on vendors and clients and things like that. You're going to find yourself in one of those positions in any organization, even if you're an organization of one, right? So anyway, just recognize that each one of those levels has challenges that come with it, and the way that we communicate with that, which is why this activity is just fantastic. As an effective communication activity, because it surfaces all of these juicy, amazing behaviors that then you can target in on in your debriefing. So depending on what the needs and roles of the client or the group is that you're working with, this activity will surface whatever that behavior is that you can really hone in on in the debrief. I've had the debrief of this activity go on for 30, 40 minutes sometimes because it's that good. So make sure you allot enough time for this activity. Minimum number of this is around 10. you know, because you need enough people in each one of the three. So minimum of 10, maximum of 30. And don't do more than 30. I tried it with 40 one time and it was a disaster. Because it did not go well. You know, if I had a group of 40, I would divide them into two groups and do two small groups of 20 with a co-facilitator, you know, or something like that. But 40, it was in two different rooms, because then people, or if they are, you know, yeah, two different rooms, because you don't want them to see and feel like it's a competition, because it pulls away from the impact of the activity once it goes to competition. So. All right, any questions pop up on this one so far?
No, we are coming up on our hour, so I guess this would be a good time to encourage folks to ask any sort of final questions, final
Okay,
thoughts.
that's my next slide. So,
Perfect
all
segue.
right, so those are three of my favorite. You know, and again, the theory pieces at the very beginning, I bring those in when I'm facilitating with groups, because it does offer validity and you know, and some good research and data to back up what you're doing, and that it's not just playing games to be playing games. It's that you know, this stuff, there's actually scientific data that backs up and research that backs up what we do, and why it's important that we surface these behaviors to talk about it. So questions, any questions?
Well, Genevieve is asking if we have a copy of this presentation. If that's all right with you, I will share these slides with folks after
Absolutely.
today's presentation.
Absolutely.
A lot of folks just appreciating these activities, saying that they've used this last one for an emotional intelligence facilitation tool.
Awesome. Very good.
And while we're just sort of wrapping up, I do want to say how awesome it is, not only these three activities, but in every activity you introduce sort of a way to tweak them for different levels, different audiences. So the Xerox game that I'm so familiar with now has a third dimension, and that changes everything.
Nice.
And you know, the Zoom game of giving people partial information and being able to use it with different groups, and then this one of, sounds like there's a lot of options for how you split people up. And
Yeah, and again, with lines of communication, you just need two ropes or two kind of boundaries, and then a bunch of stuffed animals, rubber chickens. We sell us at training wells, but my guess is you probably already have those props in your game bag as a facilitator. So
gotta have your rubber chickens.
Exactly, right? I mean, it's like the designated icon of the facilitator community is the rubber chicken.
So thanks for being here, Michelle. I also just wanted to give a quick plug. I'm really excited about your facilitated growth workshop at this year's conference, Experiential Activities for Wellness and Recovery.
Yeah.
I haven't seen you do that one before, so we're very excited to have it. And then, of course, your awesome icebreakers and energizers, which everybody loves and has made an appearance at several of our conferences.
Yeah, very good.
We're looking forward to seeing you in November, and hopefully a bunch of those folks out there as well. Come join us in Orlando.
Well, thanks for having me, Dan. I appreciate coming back and just giving some more content out there to the facilitator world. I love it.
All right. Well, we'll see everybody later. Have a great day.